Okay, this is part 11 of Federalist number 6. Starts with the paragraph that says, the wars of these two last mentioned nations have in a great measure grown out of commercial considerations. The last two mentioned nations, he means England and France. So they constantly were at war, even though they were commercial republics or commercially oriented. They were not republics, but he's answering those people that don't want this constitution that's been proposed by the Philadelphia Convention. These people are saying we don't need to unite if we stay if we have a republican form of government, and if we trade with one another, we won't go to war. And he says, wrong. Both republics, whether commercial or non-commercial, they'll go to war. Monarchies, whether commercial or not commercial, they go to war. It's that human passion and ambition and avarice, the love of money, the love of fame, the love of power, will drive people as well as societies to war. So he says, don't be fooled by it. He continues, the desire of supplanting and the fear of being supplanted, either in particular branches of traffic or in a general advantage of trade and navigation, and sometimes even the more culpable desire of sharing in the commerce of other nations without their consent. So he gives examples. When he says supplanting, he's talking about there are times that countries think, republics think, monarchies think, if we let this other nation trade with our colonies or trade with the people that we trade with, they might supplant us. In other words, gradually they might replace us. They might take over our trade. They might push us out of this trade. So says that's another reason that whether commercial countries, whether republic or not, they'll fear that they're losing their share of the market and they'll go to war. Sometimes they feel like if they have ships and they use these ships to carry other people's products, produce to other markets, they feel like they'll lose their share of the market in what they call the carrying part of the economy, which in other words, they're carriers. They've got ships, and they might not make anything themselves. They might not produce anything themselves, but they are part of the transportation system, and they think that they might get replaced. And they cause a scene. They create a situation where countries go to war. So he says, don't be naive. That love of money, love of power, that selfishness, ego, they all play a part in causing countries, regardless whether they're commercial or not, regardless of the size, go to war. And the next paragraph says, the last war between Britain and Spain sprang from the attempts of English merchants to prosecute an illicit trade with the Spanish Main. These unjustifiable practices on their part produced severity on the part of the Spaniards towards the subject of Great Britain, which were not more justifiable because they exceeded the bounds of a just retaliation and were chargeable with inhumanity and cruelty. Look at what Britain and Spain did the last time they went to war. Britain did something that Spanish thought was unjust and unfair to their trade. So they imprisoned some of the Englishmen that were in the lands that were controlled by Spain. And English people thought that this should not be tolerated. They shouldn't let the Spanish treat English like this. And they in turn turned around and looked for reasons for war, for chaos, just to avenge the wrong they thought was done to their people. And sometimes one side is cruel and the other side becomes even more cruel out of selfishness, out of ambition, out of self-love. And he continues, many of the English who were taken on the Spanish coast were sent to dig in the mines of Potosi. They sent the captured English to work in mines. And by the usual progress of spirit of resentment, the innocent were, after a while, confounded with the guilty in indiscriminate punishment. And this is what happens when that resentment and sense of anger and hate takes over. The other side sometimes even does worse, does things that are just even more inhumane. And sometimes even people who are not guilty, who are bystanders, get punished, as well as people who were guilty. So it says something indiscriminate happens. They don't recognize what the difference is between guilty and innocent. And they punish both of them. The complaints of the merchants kindled a violent flame throughout the nation, which soon after broke out in the House of Commons and was communicated from that body to the ministry. Letters of reprisal were granted, and war ensued, which in its consequences overthrew all the alliances that but 20 years before had been formed with sanguine expectations of the most beneficial fruits. So one side did something wrong, the other side wanted to take revenge. So when the English were treated badly by the Spanish, look at the words he uses. It says, the complaints of merchants kindled a violent flame. It's like fire. Fire that once it starts, spreads so rapidly. It says it started merchants that were profiting from this trade, or maybe even felt bad for some of the people that were punished. Who knows? But they started the flame of revenge, flame of hatred, and it spread fast and was communicated from that body to the ministry. So fire spread, fire of hatred and revenge spread, and with merchants it went to the House of Commons. Remember we talked about House of Commons, supposedly reflective of the population and not just reflective, representing the dukes and barons, but representing the commoners, the average people. So from there, from Parliament or House of Commons, it spread like wildfire into the ministry and the court and the king, and then they wanted to take revenge, and that caused all the agreements that they had reached, that Britain and France had reached 20 years earlier, so that they can trade with each other and prosper and do better. All of that went up in flame. So, it says, you Americans living in the 13 states that think we don't need to unite, you are wrong. You're mistaken. And I think we, people of the world, If we think the way we have united under United Nations is enough, we're definitely wrong. Because the way United Nations has been set up is not going to answer to or be a solution to most of the problems of the world. The sad thing is that the 5 permanent Security Council members are blind right now. They don't realize that what's going to happen with the environment and all the catastrophes that are going to happen, they're going to be safe and immune. If just this hurricane right up this past few days in Houston hasn't shown that the most powerful country in the world, the richest country in the world, United States, was almost helpless when that hurricane came. Nobody could do anything. They just had to respond to it after it had mellowed out or calmed down or tampered off. So we are foolish if we think we are the 5 permanent Security Council members, and we are immune from all the problems around the world that is going to even engulf us. Just this past 2 years, look at all the refugees that crossed Mediterranean, went into southern Europe, and then all of a sudden European Union is even in danger. England decided to go for Brexit just because they said, oh, we don't want any more of these foreigners. And it's all because of drought in Africa, because of drought that almost caused the beginning of the war in Syria, and everything else that we know about. So nobody's immune. We're all on it. We're all in it together. This beautiful planet is home to all of us, and we better wise up.